This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
It's been said that the best way to hook people in to watch a show from the beginning is by presenting the people with a great introduction, one that grips their attention from the jump. So guess what I didn't do? Yep, silly me. Forgot to plan an intro again. One may call that poor planning. You know what I call it? I call it try not to get caught in the web of repetitive intros. I mean, you get the same 30-second snippet before I even start talking. That should be good enough, right? No. Then again, that's why I do this casually. Because if they paid me to do this for a living, I'd run people off by the end of episode 1. Could I benefit from a co-host? Maybe. But that would also mean I'd have to find a friend or somebody that shares the same common interests as me when it comes to professional wrestling. And the odds of that happening are zilch to nada. Ain't happening. Not in this generation. Luckily for you all, though, got a great selection of content we're going to be talking about today that'll make up for the cruddy introduction. Hopefully. It never does. I said we were going to do it. I had this review in the can for well over a week now. Been foaming at the mouth to get the chance to finally talk about it. Yes, on today's FSWR show, we are going to be diving into a WWF classic. It happened on March 20th, 1994 at MSG in New York City. And it just so happens to coincide with our series of ongoing Retro Raw reviews. We've been going through all the archives of the Retro Raws starting in 93. And we've made it through 1 year of the cartoon era of the WWF. Now we are in 1994. And we've made it to the grandest stage of them all. What we were told after the fact was the greatest WrestleMania of all time. Even though we hear WWE blow smoke up our rears about that every single year they get finished with WrestleMania. I mean, you never believe it, because more often than not, it's not. It's a complete lie. But I'll say this. WrestleMania 10, a very unique special event. I watched this bad boy last weekend during my downtime when I didn't have to watch an episode of Retro Raw. Have a lot of notes I took. Lots of up and downs to cover in this thing. And since I'm not exactly sure how long it'll take me to get through all the content, again, trying to keep this show at a fair, reasonable length of time because I actually value that, and everybody else's for that matter. Why don't we go ahead and just segue right into it? We're talking about trying to hook people in from the beginning of the show. Well, here's my sales pitch. Come listen to me talk about WrestleMania 10 as we venture through WWF's retro library of the 90s. Our first one of these retro WrestleManias we're actually going to be covering on the channel before. And here's the first thing I'm going to say about this show before we even scratch the surface of the card. I must say, a WrestleMania pay-per-view with a runtime of 2 hours, 44 minutes, and 16 seconds. Almost unheard of by today's comparison. I actually had to pause and make sure the show was not broken down into 2 separate events. When I saw that the WrestleMania 10 show ran at a little under the 3-hour mark, I nearly peed myself. I was like, how is it that we've gone from reasonable 3-hour pay-per-view lengths, particularly for the Big Four shows in WWE, now in 2023, God, we're lucky to get to bed by midnight after watching one of these things. There were a lot of things I took for granted as a kid. But at the tippy tip top of that list, above anything else, it has to be me not appreciating when wrestling pay-per-views didn't run for 8 goddamn hours. So now that we've gotten the good news out of the way, guess we're ready to talk about WrestleMania 10. No, I'm kidding. Good Lord. Not going to immediately shit on this thing from the beginning. At least give me the opportunity to build up to it. Obviously, the show is primarily remembered for 2, arguably 3 matches. I think a lot of people look back at this show with fond memories because of how they kind of solidified and tied up a lot of loose ends with Bret Hart's main event run from the previous year. It's almost incredible to think back and remember a time when WWF actually pre-planned and executed on year-long story concepts. But that was kind of the Bret Hart run from 93 to 94 and the chase to the title picture. He dropped the belt to Yokozuna at the previous year's WrestleMania. Kind of got sidetracked with the Jerry Lawler stuff in the summer of 93. And then once they started kickstarting the stuff back up with him and Owen, you almost kind of forgot that Bret was still technically owed a title rematch with Yoko from the previous year's WrestleMania. And they threw a lot of obstacles in Bret's path along the way in the lead up to this show. Obviously the Owen Hart match notwithstanding. So even if you could see that the end goal was to eventually get the strap back on Bret, and they still tried to lead you astray with some of these side angles in the process, it wasn't totally apparent in the lead up to the show. They were still trying to throw people off course a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. Suspension of disbelief is what this business was built on. So if they were going to make it totally apparent from January onward that, yeah, Bret's pretty much being propped up to win the belt, then there's really no suspense there. So the Owen obstacle was kind of an idea, or a genius idea at the time, if you really think about it. We'll talk about the Bret-Owen match in a sec. I usually don't like harping on the showboaty celebrity wing stuff on these events. One of my running jokes with all the Retro Raw shows we've been talking about was that they had more guest celebrities booked for WrestleMania 10 than they did guys on the card. God, all these random pop culture names springing up out of the woodwork in 94. Most of them are names that I didn't even know about. Didn't know shit from apple butter about them. The most notable name of the bunch was Little Richard, who sang America the Beautiful at the beginning here, with the gospel choir at ringside trying to get all the white people in the crowd to clap on beats 2 and 4. That was high comedy. But, they also showed the graphic for all the WrestleMania 1 footage in the Garden. Tried to tie that over with this show since they were an MSG. They'd also do that same thing a decade later with WrestleMania 20. They kept the 10-year anniversary story running. Then they pretty much pitched over to the opening bout for the show. Obviously what I think is renowned as one of the better curtain jerkers for a WrestleMania card. That being the brother versus brother match between Owen and Bret. Keeping in mind that Bret was also pulling double duty on this pay-per-view with having to work in the opening match on the card and then coming back later on to work the main event. Yokozuna also wrestled twice on the card, but obviously Bret's 2 matches were more memorable, which is why people talk about that more. It's fun going back and seeing the promo package where we got the infamous I kicked your leg out of your leg angle from the Royal Rumble. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see the promo, but we saw the Owen turn, and that was the point that kind of set this feud into motion. And, as I alluded to before, this is one of those aforementioned matches that people remember the show for by and large. It's funny because, You know, when WWE runs those promotional videos, they always show the footage of the ladder match. But the Owen-Brett match, it always takes a back seat for whatever reason. And I kind of always preferred this over the ladder match, if I'm being honest. Not just because I fucking hated Shawn. I just thought this match always stacked up better over the years. And like, I mean, it's so hard for me to sit here and even attempt to break this down. I've seen this match, I don't know, somewhere in the ballpark of 100 to 150 times throughout my life. It deserves all the acclamation and the credit it's gotten. I won't argue against this being one of the best WrestleMania openers of all time. You know, we've covered the story throughout the Raw report, so I won't get too meticulous with all that. The whole idea headed into the match was that Brett refused to fight Owen, but Owen's had the chip on his shoulder for years now about being seen as the inferior brother. And it all boiled to a head here where Brett finally accepted the challenge, begrudgingly, all in an effort to teach Owen a lesson in respect. And these two were on a whole different level of professionalism for this thing. Owen in particular, man, he was outstanding in this match. Everything he did, from the weaselly heel tactics to the smug promos he was cutting. This is what I've been talking about when I say this is the period in the business where Owen was at his peak. You know, one thing I forgot about this match, and again, this is good doing these retroactive historical reviews again, because, you know, there's certain details you forget about when you see these things in real time. I forgot that Jerry Lawler was back to do color for this show with Vince. Totally escaped my memory. You know, and obviously with the prior history with him and Brett, you know, he wasn't going to hesitate to take pot shots at Brett where he could. You know, that was one of the big themes on their feud dating back to the summer of the previous year, before the whole sexual allegation charges got filed and Jerry disappeared from the show abruptly. You know, they had Lawler talking shit on Brett's family for weeks, mainly targeting his parents. So, of course, Lawler's out there making jokes about Helen's health and, you know, how Brett was going to wind up joining her in the hospital after Owen gets through with them. Just typical heel Lawler material. But even with the way they laid out the match, the whole brother versus brother dynamic, you know, they basically established that both guys were evenly matched from the get-go. It was a very back and forth pace. I believe Vince's favorite term to use, seesaw match. You know, Brett was successful in countering a lot of Owen's offense, but Owen was always right back there to cut Brett off again and gain control. Everything was high energy, bam, bam, quick transitions from one thing to the next, but, you know, it obviously flowed well and made sense with everything they did. You know, they broke out a lot of false finishes, which I've normally been opposed to doing for opening matches on a pay-per-view, but, I mean, you look at the talent involved with this, you can get away with it. You know, it's not like we're talking about two underneath green guys that weren't over with the crowd. It's Owen and Brett, for God's sake. You know, and one of the things that always stood out for me about this match, probably one of the things I can always credit Brett for, even if I was never the biggest Brett guy, I mean, you heard me talk about that on the show before if you're an avid listener of the podcast, but the one thing I always appreciated about Brett, he never phoned his shit in. And you look at his position on a WrestleMania card like this. He was scheduled to work 2 matches going in. He could have gone out there and played it safe. He could have gone out and put in 50% of the effort in this opening match. But he didn't. He and Owen went out there and they worked their asses off. And regardless of my opinion on Brett the guy, I can never take away from his work ethic. Probably a little too serious for his own good at times, but when the red light was on, it was game time. You know, obviously one of the big stories in the match was the spot where Brett did the springboard out to the floor onto Owen, came up selling his knee, which was the bad knee they had been playing up as bothering him dating all the way back to the Royal Rumble. So Owen took advantage of that, worked that over for a while. You know, Brett would keep fighting back and hitting Owen with a lot of high-impact stuff, but he'd either be too late to get to the pinfall attempt or they'd sell that his leg plagued his ability to hit the move effectively. And we get that great shot where Owen's got Brett in the sharpshooter after Owen cock blocks him. They did a great job milking that hold, getting the shots where Brett's struggling through the pain. And after he's able to break the hold, they do that build up to the flash finish at the end where Brett attempts the Oklahoma roll out of the corner onto Owen, but Owen stacks him up, holds his shoulders down, gets a surprise pin. Brett sells it perfectly, total shock and disbelief. Everybody in the building gasps. You know, this is 2023. The cameramen would have been cutting to 50 different people to get all the shock reactions. Gifts for decades. But, yeah, man. Obviously, too, we had the Owen promo in the back immediately afterwards. He's putting over his win and talking about how now that he's beaten Brett, he'll get the respect he deserves. And you look at a finish like this on paper, it's probably one of those situations where if you saw it for the first time in 1994, you were kind of bewildered. Like a smart fan would look at that and go, why in the fuck would you beat Brett in the opener when he's wrestling for the title later on in the show? And then, spoiler alert for later on, he ends up winning the world championship. And granted, when I saw that as a kid, I mean, I was just as surprised as everybody else. I always kind of figured that Brett was winning the title in the main event anyway. So when I saw him lose to Owen in the opening match on the card, I was confused. But as you see how the story unfolds later in the year, contextual analysis kind of paints a clearer picture. It all ends up making sense in the end. You know, like I said from the top, though, this is viewed as one of the all-time WrestleMania matches. And even in 2023, when I go back and watch it again, it still holds up. It's one of Owen's best career matches, if not his single best. I deem it one of Brett's best career matches. One of the best WrestleMania matches of all time, easily. Everything all kind of molds together perfectly with what you want out of a WrestleMania caliber match. You know, I think the only thing you can find at fault with it, if you really wanted to nitpick it, it was one of those unfortunate circumstances where they didn't leave a whole lot of room for growth throughout the card. You know, they basically went out there and stole the show in the first 30 minutes of the pay-per-view and left everybody else to piss in the wind. You know, hoping something else would come close to topping it. And they almost got there with the Shawn Razor match, but that was easily the closest anybody came. You know, even Brett's match with Yoko in the main event came nowhere close to topping this as an overall package. That's really the only thing you can complain about it. Where do you go from there? Which is probably a good segue for me to talk about the next match. Speaking of things that came nowhere close to topping the Owen-Brett match, where the only highlight of it was seeing the Fink do the ring intros, now with a full head of hair, thanks to Cy Sperling's magic hair treatment. The cure to hair restoration, founded long before Bosley became popularized. I wish Sperling had the ability to cure the horrors that perpetrated my TV monitor during this fiasco. If Orange Cassidy and Danhausen are the modern-day equivalent to bad wrestling comedy, I think I've officially found the classic counterparts. Doink and Dink are the Orange Cassidy and Danhausen of the mid-90s. By every sense of the word, they were the epitome of bad turn-the-channel comedy. For everything the Brett Owen match was in the opener, this Bam Bam Luna Vachon versus Dink Doink mixed tag was the polar opposite end of the scale. Putrid, vile, revolting, devoid of merit. Should I keep roasting it? I think you get the point. Equally as horrible as the match was the absolute epic fail of a post-match angle, where they tried to do multiple spots with the midget that did not work at all, one of which included a spot where Bam Bam and Luna were supposed to miss a double running splash onto Dink, and Dink was supposed to move out of the way so the heels could eat the mat. Not only did Luna end up hitting Dink with a splash anyway, but this was so poorly botched, everybody got completely lost with what they were supposed to do, and I think the whole thing just ended with the heels bailing out. All the while, the fans are just kind of sitting on their hands, not reacting. Probably because even they realize how fucked up all this was. Just an absolute train wreck of a segment. And just to add insult to injury, apparently somebody thought to themselves, you know what we really need for WrestleMania 10? A fake Bill Clinton. Yep. That was the thing that happened. Totally forgot about that too. With IRS sitting in the background, probably counting down the days left on his contract before he could jump ship to the competition, which even by this point was barely even competition. And Vince sold the imposter president angle by never mentioning Bill Clinton by name, probably because he saw how this executed and he realized how embarrassingly horrible it all was. Speaking of embarrassingly horrible, this Falls Count Anywhere match with Crush and Randy Savage. A Falls Count Anywhere match with the added stipulation that the match cannot end until one guy is left standing in the ring for at least a full minute after executing either a pinfall or submission. Because apparently even WWF was not immune to putting a hat on a hat with gimmick matches back in the day. To be fair, I guess you could say it was WWF's take on the Texas Death stipulation. And to my recollection, I don't think they ever booked a Falls Count Anywhere stipulation like this ever again. After watching it, I think I understand why. This match, I think, is mainly only remembered for the finish, for good or bad. And it also took into account why they added the semi-last man standing stipulation here. I remember watching this match and being left feeling so underwhelmed when it was over. I was never a big Crush fan to begin with. I just never really understood what WWF's fascination was with the guy. Like all the various character incarnations, heel face swaps, what have you. I just thought the guy was bland and not very interesting. But even so, for as long as they've spent building up this program, going back to the angle they shot in like the fall of '93 when Crush turned on Savage and joined up with Master Fuji, to go whatever it was, like 5 or 6 months, and we finally get the blow-off match, and the whole thing goes less than 10 minutes with another totally fucked up finish. Ugh. I mean, it was easily one of my least favorite Randy Savage matches I've ever seen. I mean, I'll just skip to the finish because that's really the only noteworthy thing that happened here. They brawl into the aisleway, and it eventually bleeds over into the back area of the building. Conveniently, Savage and Crush fight over to a giant scaffold structure that just so happens to also have a large rope and cable hanging on the side of it. Also, Savage could pin Crush and then attempt to hook his feet up to the cable, so he could then suspend him upside down in the air while Savage goes back to beat the 10 count. Clever idea in theory. The problem was that Savage got as far as hoisting Crush in the air so that he was upside down, hanging by his feet. But then he forgot to take into account that he had to let go of the rope in order to get back to the ring. So as soon as he lets go, Crush just falls back down to the concrete. And he has to lay there selling. Meanwhile, Savage gives Master Fuji a phantom sucker punch off camera that we totally missed. All we see is Fuji go down in the background while Savage is in the ring pacing around. And obviously Savage wins. What winded up also being, for all you historians out there, Randy Savage's last WrestleMania match. Yeah. probably not going out on a high note, if you were all wondering. Now again, this is the older me talking. I always say hindsight is 20/20. Am I being too harsh on this match? Possibly. But I never liked this match even as a kid. I never really liked the Savage Crush feud to begin with, which might have been part of the problem. But again, keeping everything in context that we just talked about, when you realize that this was the last WrestleMania match for Randy Savage, and he winds up leaving the company and jumping to WCW by October of this year, it really kind of paints the whole thing in a bad light that much more. I mean, the match, I don't think, did the story justice. It really didn't do anything for either guy involved. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, this was kind of the blow-off. Because like I said, after this, Savage sticks around for a little bit, but by the fall of this year, he's gone. And Crush kind of spins his wheels for a little bit until, again, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't he wind up leaving the WWF for a few years before they bring him back as one of the DOA members in like 96? So he doesn't stick around much longer either before going away. Yeah, like I said, not a fan of this match. Was never a fan of the feud. Just didn't do anything for me personally. And I just can't get over that, man. The fact that this was Savage's last WrestleMania match. It's kind of sad when you really think about it. It's kind of a dud to go out on. Another match on this card that really didn't do a whole lot for me was the women's title match. I know this is a shocking revelation, judging how much I criticize bad women's wrestling in today's product. Well, you'll be stunned to hear it wasn't much better back in the mid to late 90s. The women were a little more visually striking, but the wrestling, nothing to write home about. For anybody that didn't remember or was mildly curious for whatever reason, the match was champion Alundra Blaze defending against challenger Leonie Kai. And I just want you to all remember this for timeline purposes here. This championship was so important for WrestleMania in 1994, they just had to have this match booked for the card. Not only did they give it less than 4 minutes, but about 12 to 16 months out from this point, Alundra Blaze, the same girl you saw defend the title in this very match. Yeah, you remember what happens? She shows up on Nitro and throws the belt in a garbage can, which is easily one of the most overrated angles in the entire history of wrestling. I mean, if you watch that angle back on replay, it's a total nothing of a segment. The whole thing is just her showing up, throwing a fake belt in a trash can, and doing a real stagey promo while the announcers sit there dumbfounded. It was really nothing to write home about. But it kind of showed you how much the WWF thought of women's wrestling back in the day. Not that Vince ever took it seriously to begin with. I mean, I think that's pretty well documented. All in all, this really had no reason to exist on the card, other than to give them another excuse for a Nikolai Volkov cameo. It was only slightly more pointless than the WWF tag title match, which just so happened to be the next match on the card. Crazy how that works. Whoop, there it is. And whoop, there it goes. Another match on this card that kind of seeped through the cracks of history. It's the Quebecers defending against Men on a Mission. Yeah, mind-blowing. Hard to imagine people would have a difficult time remembering this all-time classic. Most of the highlights here were listening to Lawler make fat jokes directed at Mabel. My favorite was him going, Mabel's so huge, when he was a baby, they had to baptize him at SeaWorld. Albeit that one had me kicking for a little bit. Equally as great was Johnny Polo's booger green blazer. The biggest pop of the entire match was the spot where Jacques and Pierre gave Mabel the double suplex. And they put the camera on Polo, who was just beyond elated. The fact that his boys were able to execute a basic wrestling maneuver on this big fat tub of goo. Yet, still for whatever reason, and I've never been able to figure this out for as long as I've been watching this product, these goddamn WWF fans, they love this Men on a Mission group. I don't get it. I never did. I never will. But anytime Mabel and Mo were in featured spots as a tag team, these fans ate these guys up. It's like, I mean, the gimmick sucked. I can't reaffirm that enough. But the WWF crowd, they were so into this team. I mean, they were charismatic. I'll give them that. Couldn't wrestle worth a shit, but they had personality. And that's about where the buck stops. And when they got to the finish where Mabel and Mo had the visual pin on the Quebecers, but Polo kept running a distraction on the floor, it ends up with Mom giving Pierre a double splash onto the floor. And when they go to set up the pin on Jacques, Polo snuck in and pulled him out of the ring so the heels could take the count-out loss, which by default meant that they kept the belts. And the fans shat all over it. I mean, was the match horrible? No. But again, this is where my revisionist thinking comes into play when I'm looking at these classic shows. If you would have sat there with a straight face and told me that by the following year's King of the Ring, they were about to turn Mabel heel and have him win the King of the Ring tournament, subsequently pushing him as one of their top heels for a brief period, I'd have looked at you like you had grass growing out of your ears. Never would have thought that to be the case. But lo and behold, one of the guys in this very match, he ends up getting a short stint at the top of the card about a year out from this point. Never facilitated. Probably thanks in large part to who the champion was by that point. Not to name names. Kevin Nash. Yeah, the infamous SummerSlam event that I actually went and saw with my brothers live. SummerSlam 95. We'll talk about that fiasco in due time. But here Mabel is at the previous year's WrestleMania. And this is what they were having him do. Yeah. They didn't pre-plan everything in the WWF. Remember that. But anyway, on to more important matters. Now we've come to our first of the two featured world title matches on the card, with Rhonda Shear and Donnie Wahlberg as the special celebrity timekeepers and ring announcers. Because again, gotta get those celebrity plugs in. Rhonda's sitting there looking like a dog shitting peach seeds with that ring bell in hand, probably having legitimately no idea what the fuck she was doing out there or why any of this was happening in her life. But for our first of two WWF title matches on the show, it's Yokozuna defending against Lex Luger with special guest referee Mr. Perfect, which I believe was something they saved announcing until the moment this match was set to happen, because people went ballistic for Perfect's return, but Vince and Lawler were selling it as a shock too. I know they never addressed Perfect outright on the Raw programs as being one of the special referees for the show. They did announce that there were going to be two special guest refs, but they never mentioned names. So I think this was the first time anybody caught wind of Mr. Perfect coming back. The last time we saw heading in the WWF, I think it was right before the Survivor Series pay-per-view where he was scheduled to compete on the babyface team in one of the elimination matches. But something happened that prevented him from working the card, and they ended up pulling him from the show. I forget if it was injury or what the hell happened, but it was kind of a running theme with the Survivor Series 93 card, where they had to shuffle around a bunch of shit because the originally planned matches kept falling through. Anyway, he's back. Temporarily, that is. It's another thing we'll eventually be covering more in depth with the Retro Raw recaps. But they were supposed to make this return a big angle in the lead up to Hennig's in-ring return. And obviously that did not go according to plan, because by early summer of this year, Hennig was also out of the picture for like another year or so, undergoing surgery for more health complications he'd been dealing with. But that was only one part of the story with this title match, because then there's the whole Luger controversy and everything that stemmed as a result of the finish here. Now, we'll talk about it once we kind of recap what went down in the match, but just as a precursor to let you know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Luger's facial expression when he came down the aisleway for this thing told the whole story. He had what you hear commonly referred to as boo-boo job face. He had the fuck I'm being sent out to put this guy over look on his face. And he wasn't happy about it. After all the investment, all the stock Vince put behind the Luger gimmick from mid-93 up to this point, and poor Luger got the shaft by the end of it. Which, if you kind of think about it, it's the story of Lex Luger's entire main event career. Trace it back in the timeline. And even with Vince trying to go out of his way to babyface Luger as much as possible here, everybody could see through the smog. You know, it's really unfortunate too, because, fuck it. I said I was going to wait until the end to talk about the Luger fallout, but may as well just talk about it here since we're on the subject. Obviously, with where they were going in story, they couldn't put Luger over here. You know, in order to finalize the Bret story from the previous year, Bret had to be the one to beat Yokozuna in the main event. You know, if they swapped the title over to Luger here and then did a rapid-fire title switch in the main event, it wouldn't have worked. Nor would it have been a smart idea. It just sucks when you realize that this match with Luger and Yoko was a rematch from the previous year's SummerSlam, when Luger was arguably at the hottest during his entire run with the WWF. And that's where you'll hear the experts talk about how it was the wrong decision to keep the belt on Yokozuna. They should have called an audible and put the title on Luger, if for a short period of time. You know, they could have found a way to get the belt back on Yoko well before the lead up to WrestleMania. They could have given Luger his moment of shine with the title, and it wouldn't have hurt anybody. And I get it. Looking back now, even though at the time I wasn't opposed to Luger not winning the belt at SummerSlam, shit, man. If this was going to be the way they blew off Luger's main event run, yeah, without a doubt they should have had him win the fucking belt. Because after this point, it was pretty much all downhill for Luger's push as a top guy. I mean, he was around for another year or so, mostly getting bounced around in mid-card purgatory. Vince had gone cold with him, and that's all there was to it. He had the really nasty falling out with Vince right before his contract expired. I mean, he basically left the company without giving a notice. And by September of 95, there he is showing up on Nitro's pilot episode at the Mall of America in Minneapolis. I remember that shit like it was yesterday. And you know, even when I go back and watch this match again, despite what I talked about with Luger still being pushed at the top of the card, you can even kind of tell by this point that the crowd was growing a little sour on him. You know, again, keep in mind, this was supposed to be a rematch from the previous year's SummerSlam. And this had nowhere near the excitement level that match had, where the people actually bought that Luger had a chance of winning the title. I don't think anybody really believed that Luger was winning this match, even the WWF fans during this point. The match itself was okay. I didn't really have any memories of the actual match, excluding the whole controversial finish. Credit to Yokozuna, though, for working 2 full world title matches in one night. We all look at guys like Bret Hart and think, well, of course, Bret wouldn't have an issue working multiple times in one show. And that guy could wrestle the entire fucking card if he wanted to and still not be exhausted by the end of the night. But this is Yokozuna we're talking about, man. Like, that guy was pushing 7 bills by this point in his career. And he'd only get bigger from there. But him being able to go out there for his weight and endurance ability, being able to effectively work 2 title matches on the same night, that couldn't have been easy. So I think Yoko deserves as much credit as Bret does for being able to work double duty like that. I mean, he dominated a large part of the match too with Luger. Luger did a lot of the selling, and Yoko controlled a lot of the offense. Like I said, it wasn't anything remarkable. If you asked me to recount any notable spots in the match, I'd be sitting here drawing blanks. But the finish here is what most people remember it for. Luger makes the valiant babyface comeback. He hits Yoko with the world's worst body slam. Gives him the big running loaded elbow shot. Jerry Lawler's pitching a fit that he's not being DQ'd for cheating. And as Luger goes to yank Cornette and Fuji into the ring for trying to run interference. Well, I'll put it gently. Cornette took a bump. Fuji just kind of laid down and pretended to sell. He saw better days by this point in his career. We'll just leave it at that. But as Luger goes to cover on Yoko, there's Mr. Perfect, pretending like he's distracted trying to deal with the dead managers in the ring. So when Luger goes to grab him by the shirt to get him to count the pin, Perfect calls for the disqualification, and he throws the match out. In all fairness, you at least could see the plans for where they wanted to take Luger after Mania as a way to give him an outing for not winning the title here. I think the writing was kind of on the wall. Vince clearly gave up on the Luger experiment and said, to hell with it, we're moving on. And it's sad, but at the same time, are you all that surprised? This has sort of been Vince's MO for his entire career as a promoter. And it would only get progressively worse over time when his senility kicked in more. He gets on board with certain guys for a while, and then he randomly wakes up one day and decides, nah, I'm over it, pal. That's kind of what happened with Luger. He had his run in the main event picture, and once it became apparent that he was never going to go all the way with him, Vince just decided, next. And that was it. Luckily Luger was able to somewhat recover when he got hot again in WCW a few years later, and they gave him a brief world title run, which was also short-lived. But hey, give WCW credit. We give him a lot of shit, but they were at least willing to go there and give him that big win over Hogan on Nitro. The balloon was kind of off the rose with Luger, unfortunately, by the time SummerSlam 93 came and went. They had their chance. They blew it. And again, I know the long-term story was always that Vince wanted to wait until WrestleMania to pull the trigger and actually execute on the title switch. But even by that token, say it hypothetically worked with Vince sticking the course with his plans. Would the crowd have accepted it the same way? Again, they cheered Luger here, but was it a nuclear babyface reaction? Not really. It was just kind of lukewarm. They chanted bullshit after Luger got fucked at the end. I think that was more so the fans feeling gypped and not getting a decisive winner. And again, the problem for Luger is that they had plans for him to feud with Hennig, and It never went anywhere because Hennig couldn't get cleared to wrestle again. The whole situation is just a tragic case of bad timing. I've talked about this before. I've always liked Luger as a talent, but when you kind of go through his history and look at the timeline, he really is a case of someone that's been jerked around so much throughout his career. It's hard to take the guy seriously as a main eventer. Even when you look back at him through the lens of history, he was a strong talent. Not the best promo in the world, but the guy always managed to somehow get himself over and stay over. But even by this point in 94, sadly, I think the ship kind of sailed. Any possible chance they had with Luger getting that title opportunity, it came and went. Long before they even made the decision to have him co-win the Royal Rumble with Brett. Because even the fans kind of shat on that finish too. It's an interesting discussion I think is worth having, but it's also kind of telling when you look back at a title match like this. One of the featured advertised matches for the card. And it kind of fell short of the mark. Not to solely blame either party involved here. I think this one's on Vince. He just didn't strike while the iron was hot. And then he kept trying to force himself to believe that he could really stretch the Luger babyface push out longer. Didn't work. But again, it's a conversation I think is worth having on a broader level. On subjects that don't need expanded on broader levels, Earthquake beat Adam Bomb in about 30 seconds, wherein the entirety of the segment can pretty much be summed up with the following bullet points. Harvey Whippleman tried to bully Howard Finkel around. Adam Bomb tried to come in and grab Fink by the collar. Earthquake ran in from behind, squashed Adam in short order. That was about all there was to it. It was an angle more than anything else. Was it something that needed to happen on WrestleMania? Arguably not. And it's probably something I don't really need to elaborate on anymore. So I'm just going to move on. That brings us to the semi-main for the WrestleMania 10 event. The second match that is well-renowned on this show. I'm obviously talking about the Intercontinental Championship ladder match between Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels. The match where all the marks try and issue the tagline, Shawn had a great match with the ladder. And to those people I say, fuck you. It's easy to undercut Razor Ramon for all his faults. I don't care what anybody says. He was just as integral in this match as Shawn was. It takes two to tango. Remember that. And much like the Owen Brett match from the opener, this is a match that I've seen forward, backward, sideways, vertical, horizontal, inverted, many times over. I can almost call the whole thing spot for spot. That's how many times I've watched it over the years. And no matter how many times I relive it, it never gets old. You probably won't hear a bigger critic of Shawn during his run in the 90s than me. No. Jim Cornette's up there too. But I was never a Shawn Michaels fan during this period. And it would only get progressively more insufferable once they put the belt on that fucking egomaniac. At least by 94, he was still relatively tolerable. But the guy worked his ass off. When he was under the bright lights, that guy worked and earned his reputation for being the showstopper. Because he was a natural on camera. No doubt. It's so amazing going back and remembering a time when ladder matches actually felt like big deals. You rarely saw them, and when you did, they didn't spam a bunch of hardware at ringside to make the whole thing look like a Home Depot sale. Now, obviously, this wasn't the first ladder match WWF did. Shawn and Brett had the one a couple years prior. But this was the first ladder match on a big stage like this. They had one ladder set up in the aisleway, and while, yes, they used the ladder as a weapon during the match, they also weren't trying to set up multiple car wreck spots like you see in modern ladder matches today, where everything's just an endless sea of jackass stunts. Let's see how many different ways we can nearly break our backs taking stupid bumps on these things and putting our bodies in harm's way for no reason. Really in a lot of ways, and I know this is more revisionist history for anybody out there that hasn't seen this match in a while. Even though this was technically billed as a ladder match, and while we've definitely seen WWF showcase the ladder spots here during the packages over time, really, the match was more so just Razor versus Shawn in a title match, which also happened to involve a stationary ladder at various points. The ladder came into play, obviously, but for about half the match, it was just both guys having a regular standard wrestling match. They did the ejection angle with Diesel early on where he got the boot from ringside, so they leveled the playing field early on. Honestly, the scariest spot in the whole match didn't even involve the fucking ladder. It was the spot where Shawn dumped Razor out to the concrete floor over the top rope. I still cringe every time I see Razor take that bump. Obviously, we remember this match for Shawn coming up with a lot of the really creative, innovative spots with the ladders that a lot of guys would adopt over time. The drop kick spot where he kicks the ladder into the guy's rib cage. The deal where he picks up the ladder overhead and drives it into the guy's stomach. Obviously, we remember the big splash that Shawn gave Razor off the top of the ladder. People have used that spot over the years, just adding their own little twist on it by doing corkscrew dives and 15 million body rotations. People always overlook the spot where Razor yanks Shawn's pants down and reveals his bare ass. Of course, all the girls in the building cum themselves after seeing that. Shawn probably came up with that spot too. It's like, you watch a match like this, yeah, they did some risky stuff. They took some bumps off the ladder a few times, but did I ever worry about both guys' safety at any point? Was I ever concerned, wondering whether or not either guy was going to make it out of there alive? Trying to do something stupid and dangerous just for the sake of doing stupid shit? No, of course not. Because I knew both guys were professional and they were only going to execute stuff that they knew how to do. How often is it that I complain about that in today's ladder matches where I just spend the entire match wincing anytime somebody even attempts to take a ladder bump? Because more often than not, I spend the entire match wondering when somebody's either going to die or seriously injure themselves. Because evidently the guys, and girls for that matter, they're going to try to do a bunch of shit that they have no idea how to pull off, and evidently somebody winds up getting hurt. In matches that don't mean a goddamn thing anymore and are nothing but infinite spot fests. I watched Razor and Shawn here. Never thought for a minute either guy was in grave danger of getting hurt. Never thought either guy was going to attempt to do something stupid for shits and giggles. And honestly, it's why I go back and relive this a million times and never get bored with it. Shawn's going to have his occasional moments where he acts like a jackass during the match, but even here, he wasn't as out of control as he'd wind up being a year or two later. I always laugh at the spot where Shawn goes to try and knock Razor off the ladder and the ladder falls straight down on Shawn's back. Yeah, for anybody curious, it wasn't the casket match with The Undertaker at the 98 Royal Rumble that fucked Shawn's back up. It was a spot right here where somehow, some way, the ladder managed to fall straight down onto Shawn's back. Poetic justice. We all remember the spot where both guys scale the ladder together. Razor gives Shawn that great overhead throw off the ladder, but when Shawn goes to kick the ladder over, the legs end up caving in. Razor narrowly avoids falling on top of the legs. We also get the other memorable moment where Shawn folds the ladder up in the corner and comes down on Razor. It's another moment they always show in the highlight reels. But without a doubt, the finish to this thing, it's fucking outstanding. one of those perfectly executed spots that they could not have pulled together better if they tried. Shawn gets crotched on the ropes after Razor pushes the ladder over. Shawn manages to get his foot caught up in the ropes. The people are all going nuts as Razor goes to set up the ladder. I always like Jerry Lawler on commentary having a conniption over Shawn getting trapped in the ropes, saying, "Let me go help him. I can help." And then we get that awesome shot where Razor pulls down both titles, takes a nasty looking bump onto the mat. But, it really came off like a photo finish at the end there. And that's the other thing, too, that I love about this match. I think one of the big problems with ladder matches nowadays is that the finishes are generally the same formula every time. Something happens where a guy gets knocked off a ladder, so there's only one person left standing at the top of the ladder to grab whatever's hanging above the ring. But it's not a race or a struggle where you're biting your nails waiting for somebody to run in at the last second to stop them. It's just kind of a predictable finish. It's like, okay, he's there. He pulls the gimmick down. He wins. But this always has that nail biter, heart racing type finish because, Shawn is clearly trying to get back on his feet and free himself from the ropes. Razor's desperately climbing the ladder as fast as he can. So it's one of those images where you can't take your eyes off the screen because you're still wondering if Shawn's going to manage to sneak in there last minute to thwart Razor. And then Razor wins. The people all shit themselves. Shawn just falls down on the mat. Razor sprawled out in dead man's position with both belts. It's a great finish. Hey, imagine that. No referees had to hold the base of the ladder to help stabilize it so Razor could climb the fucking thing. Fucking AEW numbnuts still trying to defend that shit. Idiots. But yeah, what a match. What a finish. Without a doubt, one of my favorite ladder matches of all time. I mean, it's a toss-up between that one and the match they would have at the following year's SummerSlam. I mean, you know what they say, you can never top the original. But I can never have enough good things to say about this match. Hats off to both men. Shawn, as much of a prick as he was, dude was damn good. Can't ever take that away from him. People always rave about this as being a revolutionary match in the business for the time. Again, for good or bad, depending on how you interpret it. I have my own opinions personally. But surely, for this period in the business, it was very groundbreaking. If only it didn't entice the marks later on to try and turn this gimmick match into a game of 1,000 ways to die, I could probably still sit here in 2023 and tell you with a straight face that I look forward to the next time they book ladder matches. Unfortunately, I can't say that because, well, for one, we don't see them once in a blue moon like they used to. Now we see them every fucking week and they all suck. But, I'm not going to get hung up on modern wrestling again. I'd be here for hours pitching a fit. Go out of your way to see this match. If you've never seen it, which I assume most people have. So at this point in the show, and I actually forgot about this until we saw the quick VTR for it, there was supposed to be a 10-man tag on this card with a bunch of underneath guys, but I can't remember. I believe the story was that the Shawn Razor match ran longer than expected, and since WWF wasn't running a streaming service back then where they could buy more airtime, they were basically handcuffed to working in the time constraints for this event. So they ended up cutting this match from the show altogether. We only saw the heels arguing in the back, not being able to figure out who the team captain was going to be. So that was their way of informing us that the match was not taking place. Bad guys arguing over who the team captain is. Oh well. They can't figure it out, so guess the match isn't happening now. The heel team consisted of the Head Shrinkers, Rick the Model Martel, Jeff Jarrett, and IRS. And judging by that heel team alone, I can venture a guess that the face team was not a whole lot more enticing. So it was probably a good call removing that match from the card. And to be fair, I was already kind of getting fatigued by the time we got to the main event with Bret and Yoko. And judging by the jump start they got off for this match, I'm thinking that ladder match ran a lot longer than initially anticipated. This was obviously the second of our 2 featured world title matches for the card. And with Mr. Perfect being the first guest official for the match, the guest ref for the second title match, another big surprise at the time, none other than WWF legend Rowdy Roddy Piper. And how fitting, right? 2 years prior, it was WrestleMania 8, the night Bret Hart defeated Roddy Piper for the Intercontinental Championship. Pinned him clean in the middle of the ring. So they kind of had that stewing throughout the match, wondering whether Roddy was going to screw Bret over here, get a little bit of revenge from the 2 years prior. And they were doing such a great job milking the tension between Piper and Yoko. Like, you almost had to figure a swerve was eventually going to come. But no, we didn't get that. Instead, we got Piper calling the action straight down the middle. Yoko and Bret had moderately unmemorable championship title match. Piper ended up kind of stealing the show here, unfortunately. You still have to give credit to both guys for working 2 matches in one night like they did here. And again, full lengthy title matches too. You know, this wasn't Bret going in there and beating Yoko in 90 seconds. They went in there, they worked a standard main event match. Probably altogether it went about 12 minutes. Neither guy phoned in the effort either. The crowd was pretty hot for it too, all things considered. You know, again, I think in the back of their mind, they all kind of assumed Bret was winning this match. You know, especially after seeing Luger get fucked earlier in the night. And they kept things interesting here with the Piper angles. Him punching Corny in the face on the floor, getting physical with Yoko a few times. And they do the old slip on a banana peel finish where Yoko goes up for the bonsai drop, but he loses his footing on the ropes. Bret moves out of the way as Yoko crashes and burns on the ring mat. And he crawls over, gets the cover. 1, 2, 3. Crowd goes apeshit for the finish, as you can imagine. Yoko's looking around and selling it like, what the hell happened? And he's obviously miffed at Piper, so he goes to give chase after the bell. They completely vanish into the ether. I don't think we ever got a follow-up on that. And they give the ring to Bret to close out the show. You got a bunch of the baby faces emptying out from the locker room to celebrate with him. Luger being one of the first names to come out. You know, they had their little handshake deal, patched up some of their differences from the controversy of the Rumble. That was cool. You know, you had some of the celebrities coming in and doing the same deal. Rhonda Shear, once again, looking totally befuddled of her surroundings. And they had that great closing shot with Owen showing up in the aisleway to do the stare down with Bret. He's seething over the fact that he's once again getting undercut in the spotlight. He gets that win over Bret in the opener. He thinks the spotlight's on him. And by the end of the night, it still winds up being all about Bret. And again, you obviously see them planting the seeds for that story continuation. It's really well done stuff. You know, again, the match itself was a nothing burger. Roddy kind of overshadowed the entire match. But the end goal was more important. They got the belt back on Bret. You know, they set the stage for where they wanted to take things in the next several months. They advanced a couple of the other key stories along the way, even if some of them never really expedited. And again, I joked about it at the top of the show, but there is a lot to like about this WrestleMania event. It surely didn't reflect by the time we got to WrestleMania 11 the following year, because that entire year of 95 for the company was atrocious. But at the time, you watch WrestleMania 10, afterwards, you're left feeling with a good impression that even during the cartoon era of the WWF, they could still pull off great pay-per-views, and it left you optimistic for the future. You thought, man, they're really setting up some good stuff. I wonder where it all transpires. No. We saw where it led, but at least as they were starting to shape up the card for the summer of '94, it looked promising. And on the subject of Mania Fallout, that's probably a good segue into the following night's episode of Monday Night Raw. And indeed, it was the night after WrestleMania, because poor old Vince McMahon, still relatively hoarse trying to call the action on this thing. Somehow he was able to power through it with the Macho Man on color. And of course, he's one day removed from the match with Crush. So when Vince asks him if he knows of Crush's whereabouts, Savage makes a reference that he is currently hanging out on 33rd Street. Get it? Hanging out. Because, the Macho Man tried to hang Crush by his legs from a giant scaffold. It failed in the end, but they had an idea. Now, in all fairness, as you'll wind up finding out as we run down the show here, yes, it was the night after WrestleMania, and whereas a lot of modern fans have sort of been educated to know that the Raw episode after WrestleMania is typically seen as one of the bigger TV shows they run all year, typically having more so to do with the crowd being filled with more of the hardcore audience, this was still 1994, so they were not as hostile. They were definitely wired up here in Poughkeepsie, though, but they also weren't chanting derogatory slurs for the entire program or trying to hijack the segments. It probably would have come in handy for the opening match on the card. I don't think they ever clarified whether or not this was non-title, but their first match on television, I repeat, the night after WrestleMania 10, it's the Bushwhackers taking on the Quebecers with Johnny Polo. And if you take a solid 3 seconds to picture in your mind what this probably looked like in execution, you're more than likely not too far off. Picture in your mind what a Bushwhackers match looks like. It was absolutely, without a doubt, a Bushwhackers match. They did all the usual comedy spots. Poor Jacques and Pierre having to oversell and overbump for everything. There was a solid 10 seconds early on where the hard cam malfunctioned, so all you saw was black screen while Vince was calling spots. I presume that was divine intervention kicking in at the time, but unfortunately the match kept going. It was rather basic stuff. Luke and Butch got the early shine, wacky gyrating included. Quebecers were able to cut them off and work them over for the heat spots. Ended up with the Bushwhackers making one of the worst babyface comebacks of all time, including a spot where Butch had Luke in a standing headlock so he could use him as a battering ram into the Quebecers. And they actually sold this, which was even more egregious. And it wound up with Polo trying to run blatant interference behind the ref's back so the Bushwhackers could chase him around ringside, trying to double-team him on the apron, only for Jacques to drive a knee into Butch's back and get the pin. At which point, as they go to cut to Vince at ringside so he can try to do an interview with the heels, as he goes to ask Johnny Polo what's next for the champs, here comes Captain Lou Albano to lay out the challenge to the champions, asking them if they'll accept the challenge to wrestle any tag team of Albano's choosing. And of course, the heels are pompously running down the captain as a has-been, but they also say that they will take on any newcomers, to which I noted, well, anyone's better than men on a mission, right? Or so I thought. So as we came back from commercial, following the quick WrestleMania 10 highlight reel, we got, well, several things in fact. Not the first of which was IRS giving us all a lecture on why we need to give our hard-earned money to the government. We had a list of top reasons on why we should pay our taxes. I'm not kidding. That was the thing that happened. One of those reasons being that paying taxes is a privilege, to which I noted, yeah, if you're a bureaucrat that sucked at the government teat your entire life and never did anything useful. He also said that if anybody was caught cheating on their taxes, then the IRS was going to wind up forcing them to work weekends. So, like the majority of people in this country then, correct? Are there actually people out there that are strict Monday to Friday only workers? Like the typical 9-to-5ers that only do weekdays? I mean, I know they exist, but I just presume most people work Saturdays these days. I mean, Sundays are usually the day off for most people out there, but most people I know still work Saturday. By the way, if you're wondering, was there any point to this? The answer was no. They just thought it would be a good idea for Mike Rotunda to lecture people on the importance of giving away the majority of their income to a bunch of politicians that spend it all on garbage government programs that end up doing nothing constructive for society anyway. The money all goes to diversity training and environmental justice. You know, because that's what common average people spend their daily lives focusing on. How can I make myself more inclusive to the world? Or how can I stop global warming? You know, the important matters. The things that are totally in our control. I think I figured out why I don't have friends. Anyway, getting back to the show, Tatanka had a squash match with Chris Hamrick. And the last time we saw Tatanka on Raw, they dedicated an in-ring segment to him being presented with a headdress, courtesy of his native comrades. The context for why this was done was not explained particularly well, but anybody with half a brain out there could easily figure out where it was headed. They gave Tatanka a headdress gimmick that he would continually wear to the ring and conveniently set on the ring post during his matches. It's almost like this was done so a heel could evidently end up stealing it at some point down the road. Perhaps to get heat. Sorry to spoil something that's yet to come. Here's pretty much everything I wrote down here. Tatanka hit some moves for a while. He won with the Samoan drop. It literally just existed. Vince and Macho Man spent the majority of the match talking about Lex Luger getting fucked out of the WWF title at WrestleMania, so you could tell where their headspace was at during all this. That was followed with Todd Pettingill in a dark, empty locker room doing another recap of the pay-per-view. He mainly covered the celebrities that guest appeared on the show, including an exclusive interview with Rhonda Shear, who, in the most gentle, kind way I can possibly put it, she literally had no idea what the fuck she was talking about. Her dialogue basically consisted of her screaming, "Wow," and "Oh my gosh, it was such a fantastic event," and "I can't believe it," and "Bret Hart and I had pink on." That was Rhonda's shrewd input on her WrestleMania X experience. That is what she observed the entire night. She was wearing the same color as Bret. Riveting. Speaking of riveting, when I look up that adjective in the dictionary, you want to know what the first definition that immediately comes to mind? It's diesel. Specifically so, Diesel wrestling a match. I believe I saw a sum total of 4 moves executed here, minus the hair flip. He won with the jackknife powerbomb in about a minute. It was, indeed, riveting. And just think, in about a year's time, that same Diesel, about 8 months out from now, that guy is about to become their world champion. Not to mention him entering a program with the same guy that was involved in the next segment, the current WWF champion, Bret Hart. Funny how that timing works. On the topic of Bret, he came out for an interview with Vince. It is the night after he won back the WWF Championship from Yokozuna. After a years-long journey of climbing back to the top of the mountain, he finally reached the peak again. While he's talking about being a fighting champion and promising to defend against all comers, it prompts Vince to bring up Bret's other WrestleMania opponent from the previous night, the man that he lost clean to, Owen Hart. And while Bret's not making any excuses, he basically chalks the conversation up to, well, yeah, I lost. It was one match. So what? Sometimes it's not about getting what you want, it's about getting what you need. And right now, Bret is the World Wrestling Federation champion, and he's back on top where he belongs. So, I think there was a point there. It's hard to tell. I mean, again, we talked about this in the WrestleMania review. You can see them laying the foundation for where they were headed creatively later in the year, albeit it was not one of Bret's better promos. Personally, I never thought Bret's promos were any good to begin with. I've been over that a million times. But he acknowledged the loss to his brother, and he's not going to get hung up on one loss. He's got a major target on his back right now. He's got a lot of people gunning for him. So his goal is to defend the title and face the best competition. So now we just wait to see how Owen responds to all of it. He's going to be on next week's show. And all of that led to our main event, Jeff Jarrett taking on the returning Koko Beware. Not before me mentioning their 14th consecutive Nikolai Volkov cameo appearance. It's become a running gag on these shows that Vince always has to bring up the point that Nikolai is hanging out in the front row at all these Raw shows. It's a rib, is what it is. So, of course, Double J threw some shade at him before Koko came out. Now, last time we saw Koko in the WWF, I think he was still doing the babyface team with Owen. You know, I know they were doing a talent exchange deal with the USWA in Memphis under Jerry Jarrett and Fritz. So I think Koko spent a little bit of time down there. Overall, it was a fun main event. It continues to astonish me that just 1 week ago on this very podcast, I was sitting here and reviewing a Jeff Jarrett match on AEW Dynamite with the company mascot. Here in 1994, 29 years earlier, that same Jeff Jarrett, here he is on Monday Night Raw, wrestling Koko Beware in the main event. That's almost unheard of by today's standards. And I have plenty of my own personal issues with Double J, trust me. Never been hesitant to share my personal opinion on the way that guy's been pounded down my throat for the last 30-something odd years in all the major wrestling organizations. But give him credit where it's due. He didn't get this far in the business by working dumb. Everything they did was very simple. Double J working the old school Memphis heel role, giving Koko a little bit of shine during the comeback at the end, and he catches him with the DDT off the ropes for the 3 count. At which point he had an awesome closing angle here with the Macho Man. He goes out to the floor. He immediately starts trying to get in the Macho Man's face. He's yelling at Vince that Bret Hart can be the first to give him the title shot, blah, blah. And as Jarrett's mocking Savage, you start to see him lose control. And off come the shades, off come the robe, off come the hat. And he's getting up on the announce table, throwing up the tough guy fists. Jarrett's calling for him to get in the ring and face him. And finally, Savage gets in there, He throws a few hammers on Jarrett before disposing of him out to the floor, and he raises Coco's hand in victory. It got me thinking while I'm watching this. Man. That's a rivalry that actually could have worked in the WWF had Savage stuck around longer. Jeff Jarrett and the Macho Man. I mean, granted, it's more appealing to me on paper than Savage versus Crush. But to be fair, I think most programs are more appealing on paper than anything involving Crush. But that was kind of how they wrapped everything up on the show here. Next week, we're getting Lex Luger versus Rick the Model Martel, which should be fine. Again, we already kind of discussed the downfall of Luger in the WWF post-WrestleMania 10. It was obvious that they really didn't have a lot of faith in Luger after that match. Vince soured on him, and he just kind of moved on from it. Now he basically just waits out the remainder of his contract for another year and a half, getting stuck in mid-card purgatory. Just kind of the unfortunate reality, and them's the breaks. You know what they say. Again, you can look at it historically, though, and realize, yeah, it sucks for Luger's run in the WWF, but, I mean, it didn't forever ruin his career because he managed to bounce back by the time he got to WCW, so, I mean, there were definitely some benefactors to it. Just wasn't the right fit for him in the World Wrestling Federation. That's kind of all it boils down to. And as we move on to SmackDown from Friday night, first going to readjust the mic because I am unprofessional and still haven't figured out how to get a good recording setup, even though I've been doing this for about a year and a half now. Again, it is why I'm not a specialized podcaster. They don't have degrees for those, unfortunately. Anyway, I think we're good. So what do you guys want to talk about? I like how that accidentally became one of Cody's newest catchphrases. For one, it's hilarious if you get the reference and understand the context that goes behind it. It's not something you're ever going to sell on a t-shirt to a bunch of 8-year-olds that go to school wearing WWE gear, but it's a very on-the-nose quote, and I like it. But even with that, Cody knows how to keep things professional when he's talking. Obviously, he's got a lot on his mind right now, not the least of which is his title match with Roman at WrestleMania. But there's a lot of stuff circulating with the Bloodline recently, which is why Cody's not out there to talk about anyone. He's there to talk directly to someone, one-on-one. And that man is Kevin Owens. On Raw, they apparently booked a street fight with him and Solo Sikoa. For whatever reason, I have no idea. Guess they just decided, hey, let's do a street fight. Why not? Maybe someone in the writer's room was on the phone with Tony Khan. Because we all know Tony's the king of booking superfluous gimmick matches. All joking aside, though, they're still running with the story that Owens is trying to go at it alone with the Bloodline. Now, ultimately, that bit him in the ass on Monday because, shock of all shockers, guess who interfered on Solo's behalf to help him win? Wouldn't you know who won the pony? And of course, right as Owens comes down to the ring, Cody almost immediately cuts him off and says that this isn't a conversation to be had with two parties. They need a third one. So here comes Sami Zayn. As Michael Cole noted here, Cody Rhodes playing the role of the mediator in all this.
So if I set up a meeting with you and Sharmell, and I'll be the modifier.
You mean moderator?
Shut up!
Sorry, it's the first thing I thought of when I heard Cole mention the word mediator. There are certain Steinerisms that never get old. Whether he blows up in people's faces for correcting him or calling other people fat.
He's fat!
Getting back to this, though, before I start having way too much fun with the sound drops. This promo exchange covered a lot of ground. Some of it was, well, to borrow a quote from Cody here, pulling back the curtain. You know, one of the things he said to Kevin from the onset here was right before Cody left the WWE in 2016, one of the first guys that he spoke with was Kevin Owens. And that's actually how Cody got acquainted with the elite guys to help kickstart AEW. And I use the term acquaint intentionally because, well, going by history, I think it's safe to say whatever that working agreement was with Cody, the Bucks, and Omega, it was nothing more than a mutual relationship. I wouldn't necessarily say those guys were the best of friends at the end of the day. Elsewise, Cody would probably still be working there. But that was news to me. I had no idea Owens was a major part in hooking up Cody with the Bucks and Omega. Never would have guessed it. You know, it was kept so under the radar. I don't even think any wrestling sources out there ever talked about Cody's relationship with Kevin right before his departure years ago. It makes sense, though, given Kevin's history with the Bucks on the indie circuit. Not really sure how close he was with Omega, but I mean, I guess they worked under the same roof in Ring of Honor for a brief period, so they probably had some conversations before. But again, Cody was essentially the middle ground in this conversation because this was Sammy's opportunity to hear Kevin's side of the story. And I actually thought they covered their tracks pretty well here. I was kind of afraid they were going to end up glossing over the whole backstory with Sammy and Kevin in the WWE. You know, because while they've essentially been attached at the hip for their entire run together, be it friend or foe, I was wondering how they were going to explain the fact that somehow they always wound up getting back on the same page after the fact. Like, even when they were at each other's throats and beating the living tar out of each other for years. But Sammy just wanted to know why this particular circumstance was different from at any other point when they had beef with each other. Like, why is Kevin so tentative to trust Sammy at this moment compared to any other point where they managed to forgive one another? While Sammy is imploring with Kevin that they need to work together to take down the bloodline, he's not even concerned whether or not they do it as friends. He just knows that they have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity at their fingertips to take down the champions. And it's during his passionate speech here where Owens cuts him off and basically says, well, yeah, I get it. I mean, Sammy, you've been telling me the same crap for weeks now. We can take down the bloodline, but we don't have to do it as friends. But here's the problem. Why would I want to team with somebody that doesn't even want to be my friend? And that's when Owens thanks Cody for the platform, but he says this is a waste of time. They're not getting anywhere. He passes the mic off to him, and he leaves. And at this point, it's dead quiet in the arena as they began pitching to their commercial break. And even by this point in the program, I thought, man, they're going to milk the ever-loving piss out of that story with Kevin. He's just going to hold that grudge over Sammy until the day they put this fat fucker in the grave. And right at the point they came back from the break, and Sammy chased down Kevin in the parking lot to basically tell him to forget everything he just said in the ring. Says that him and Kevin are friends. They've always been friends. And it'll stay that way. But it's not just that. They're also brothers. And both guys look at each other. I was half expecting the sitcom sad piano music to start playing in the background, but instead, Kevin turns around, he gets into his car, and he drives off. Sammy looks on totally dejected. And that's when I realized at that given moment, oh yeah, he'll be back. Kevin Owens may be a heartless bastard, but even he still has a soul. He's going to be driving down the interstate thinking about what Sammy just told him, and before you know it, he'll be back to return the favor. And there was more to come with it. So far, though, they left some big cliffhangers mingling around for the remainder of the program. It was all great stuff, and I was genuinely looking forward to seeing how they would continue this throughout the show. Took some time to get there, but it was well worth the wait, even if I had to sit through a bunch of other stuff to get to that point. One of those aforementioned stuffs was the mixed tag match with Dominic and Rhea Ripley taking on Santos Escobar and Zelina Vega. Beyond the typical WWE formula for matches where they ring the bell and go to commercial within the first 90 seconds, here's verbatim what I wrote down in my notes as the first several bullet points. Sloppy punches from Dom to Escobar. Zelina comes down on Rhea from the top rope and nearly breaks her leg. Zelina hits Rhea with a horrible Hurricane Rana off the ropes, where Rhea's head came nowhere close to hitting the mat. How is Rhea believably supposed to sell any of this girl's offense when she's twice her size? This is already shaping up to be the worst match of 2023. That was everything I wrote down before the commercial break. That was the first minute and a half. Then they come back. They wrestled for several more minutes. Somewhere during the heat spot, I heard Michael Cole mention something about Edge and Finn Balor having a Hell in a Cell match for WrestleMania. Why? I don't know. Just because. Totally negating the purpose of WWE ever running the Hell in a Cell theme live special again. But, yeah, whatever. Shortly after that, Zelina made one of the most ludicrous babyface comebacks on Rhea. All of her offense looked messy and overly rehearsed. I laughed at the spot where Escobar had Dom set up for a superplex in the corner. So instead of Rhea trying to cut Escobar off, her idea was to give Escobar a powerbomb, thus assisting him in worsening the impact of Dom taking the suplex. Whoever signed off on that spot should be immediately fired. And through all the sloppiness, it was all worth it in the end to see Rhea absolutely kill Zelina with that riptide at the finish. That looked awesome. But anything that happened previously was completely wretched. Thank God it was relatively short. And then following that, also taking into account another cliffhanger commercial break, we had Dom and Rhea in the ring waiting for Ray to come out to confront them. And this is Ray's opportunity to tell Dom like it is. So he wants Rhea to leave the ring so he can have a man-to-man conversation with his son. And of course, Dom's immediately trying to run his mouth off on Ray, calling him a pathetic excuse for a father, a deadbeat daddy, bitching and griping about all the long fatherless nights he had, all because Ray was too selfish to be there for Dom when he needed him. But Ray basically puts Dom in his place, tells him that, sure, he missed parties, graduations, football games. He hasn't always been the best dad, hasn't always been there for Dom at every moment. But that doesn't discount how much he loves Dom. All Ray's ever wanted to do was provide the best life he possibly could for Dom and the rest of the family. And while Ray would like nothing more than to have Dom by his side when he gets inducted into the Hall of Fame, when he looks at the kind of person Dom's become, a selfish, bratty, punk kid with a criminal record. He didn't directly mention the criminal record. Point is, if Ray had some random ungrateful punk-ass kid try to pick a fight with him for WrestleMania, he'd gladly accept that challenge in a heartbeat. But Dom is no ordinary punk kid. He's still Ray's son. And no matter how he tries to spin it, Ray can't do it. He's not going to put himself in that position. So his answer is still no. He won't accept the fight for WrestleMania. And in their second promo segment in a row, they concluded with really riling up the crowd. trying to engage them with wanting to see a big fight go down. And by the end, they cut the segment flat and move right on. And while I think everybody at this point can see how this story plays out, it doesn't necessarily change the fact that they essentially booked 2 back-to-back dick tease segments in a row like this, where everybody was on the edge of their seat waiting for something to make all that build-up and suspense worthwhile. And it turns out flatter than a plate full of piss by the end. I mean, the segment itself was okay. I liked Ray's promo. I'm not opposed to the whole slow burn build they're doing here, but I mean, at some point we're going to have to make this thing official. I mean, WrestleMania isn't that far out from now, right? Couple weeks, I think. I'm thinking it's about time they kick this thing into the next gear. Because right now they're testing a lot of people's patience with holding off on making this thing official. I mean, wrestling fans have the attention span of a squirrel with Down syndrome anyway. You can only withhold something for so long before the people just get bored with it and stop caring. Just throwing it out there. Speaking of me not caring about something and not having any patience to see it unfold. Apparently, there are going to be 2 fatal 4-way tag matches at WrestleMania with the men and the women. Why? I have no fucking idea. Because we need to cram as many bodies as humanly possible onto this card. So, lazy booking it is. Let's just do 2 completely random, haphazardly thrown together 4-ways with a bunch of bodies. In a match, by the way, with apparently nothing at stake. And they had a qualifying match take place here, which, again, made absolutely no sense. So, just to get this straight, making sure we're all on the same page here, they're having a qualifying tag match on the TV show to build to another tag match at WrestleMania with 4 teams with nothing on the line. So what do I care? What are they fighting for? Are they fighting for anything? Aside from bragging rights? Well, to answer my first question, why do I care? I don't. That'll probably be the one match that I skip over when I watch the WrestleMania show. Actually, it'll be 2 matches, since apparently they're doing a men and a women's match. 2 less things for me to have to bother watching. I'll take it. And all it took for me to skip over this qualifying match was hearing Liv Morgan's music play. And that was enough for me to decide, bathroom break. Duty calls, you know. It's like clockwork. As soon as I hear, watch me, I say, sure thing. You can watch me hit the can. Because that's where I'm going to be during this match. Draining the cow. And I came back just in time, unfortunately, to see Charlotte Flair making her entrance. And yet another ridiculous fucking getup. Last week, it was the sky blue jumpsuit. This week, it was neon green. With some funky-ass looking gray pattern on it. Is this... I'm sorry, someone needs to help me out here. Is this supposed to be attractive? Is there secretly a group of men out there that find women in skin-tight bodysuits attractive? Or are my standards just way too high? I mean, yeah, it showcases her figure more plainly, but it just makes her look like a cartoon superhero. And trust me, Charlotte Flair is the furthest thing from a superhero. Maybe a supervillain, like Maleficent. But she ain't fucking Superwoman. I can tell you that much. So Charlotte's ugly-ass green jumpsuit cut a promo about something pertaining to Rhea. I fell asleep during it. I mean, Charlotte bores the fucking brakes off me anytime they put a live mic in her hand. It's enough to be a cure for insomnia when the woman says a word. The more things change, the more they stay the same. That was the bulk of her promo material here before Rhea mercifully interrupted. And that statement right there, that's like the perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with WWE's women's division. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The more they keep trying to elevate girls into the main event picture and try to create new stars, the more things stay the same with them continuing to force and cram this overrated fucking botch fest down my throat and up my anal hole. For the better part of 7 years, I've been dealing with this horse crap. It sucked back in 2015 and it sucks in 2023. Nothing's changed. She's still the shits. And then, of course, you got Rhea standing across from her. She looks like a badass. She got presence. She just oozes main event charisma. You know, her voice was a little raspy during this promo, which didn't help her much. But she basically told Charlotte that everybody in the locker room fears her, men and women. The only exception to that role seems to be Charlotte. And it pisses her off. But she's been looking to get her revenge on Charlotte for 3 years now, which is why she chose her as her WrestleMania opponent. It's not a matter of want. She needs to be the champion. And when she does, Charlotte will learn to fear her. And of course, they're putting the camera on Charlotte, just giving her this smug look the whole time, totally no-selling it, totally downplaying everything Rhea's saying here, trying to hold back from laughing because she's a pompous fucking prick. At which point, here comes Dom to try and get in Charlotte's face, which gave Rhea the green light to go ahead and throw a right hand, and she finally knocks Charlotte on her ass. And had they cut it short there, I could have given this segment a passing grade. Mainly for Rhea actually getting the upper hand on Charlotte for once. But of course, they had to let Charlotte make her own comeback and get one over on Rhea again. Because WWE just can't ever let this chick look vulnerable. It's the John Cena syndrome all over again with this goddamn company. So they end up fighting on the floor. One of the worst looking fake brawls I've ever seen. Of course, Charlotte's got high heels on for 50% of the fight, which makes the whole thing that much more ridiculous. The fact that Rhea would actually struggle to beat up a chick in fucking high heels. In any sane, rational universe, a 5-year-old wouldn't have a problem beating up a woman in high heels. Meanwhile, Rhea Ripley, professional wrestler and legit athlete, struggling to take the girl down. And the fight goes on and 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 on, and it literally just will not fucking stop. There are a million officials out there failing to pull them apart. Charlotte looks like a fish out of water trying to throw all these fake punches in her goofy bare feet. She finally lost the high heels. So, yeah, that was a thing that happened. Barefoot Charlotte getting yanked away by officials. I'm surprised nobody stepped on her toes at any point. That could have ended in tragedy. And I mean, all joking aside here, beyond my normal complaints about them always going out of their way to overprotect Charlotte Flair to the point of absurdity, Is anybody else not feeling the bill to this? I'll rephrase the question. Have they done a remotely decent job trying to make Rhea look like a credible challenger? The answer's obvious, I think. It's no. And yet again, because WWE refuses to ever let Charlotte look weak. I mean, I still don't really like the idea of them doing this program to begin with, but with the way they've gone about developing this feud on television, it's underwhelming. You know, and never mind the character dynamics being completely ass backwards. I mean, there's no way that Charlotte should be the babyface in this situation. But just with the way they've gone about constructing it, Rhea does not look like a credible challenger right now. She looks incredible. And I don't mean that in the good sense. Charlotte's being way too safeguarded. It's starting to make me question who the hell I'm supposed to root for in this. Part of the milking strategy to see a babyface get their revenge is by letting the heel get one over on them at some point. All they did here by the end was cut Rhea's legs out from under her. She decked Charlotte with the punch. That should have been it. Let Rhea have her moment, and let Charlotte get her revenge later once Rhea has had a chance to boast about it. Don't ever just make her own comeback and beat up Rhea in 30 seconds after the fact. That's fucking stupid. But that's not out of the ordinary either. Everything with WWE when it comes to them booking Charlotte, it's fucking stupid. She ain't as sympathetic as Sami Zayn. I can tell you that much. Moving on here, though. The bitter pill moment of the show. Y'all know my stance on the New Day gimmick. Hate it, loathe it, despise it. Every time I hear that music, and out come the New Day skipping and gyrating and gesticulating and clapping and doing whatever the fuck this New Day gimmick is supposed to be. I still don't really know after all these years of seeing it. I just know every time I hear that music, all I want to do is skip over the segment. And I was about to. But then I learned that Xavier Woods was going to be wrestling LA Knight. Yeah. If there's one guy that I will gladly watch in a heartbeat on this show, it's LA Knight. Yeah. Even though they're needlessly jobbing him out, despite him being one of the most over talents on the entire show right now. You try and figure that one out. It's the Austin Theory booking mentality. Let's take a guy who actually has star potential, not let him rack up wins on TV. Instead, let's beat him like a dork on TV every week. That'll get him over. Yet somehow, through all the crappy ways they've been featuring the guy, the people still love him. He's still getting over. Amazing how that works out. And of course, this match came to be for artificially contrived reasons. I don't know. I guess LA Knight was making fun of Xavier for playing video games earlier. Now, if you discount the observable question, why was the cameraman in the locker room filming Xavier Woods and Madcap Moss playing video games? Well, this makes all the sense in the world. Cole mentioned here that Kofi had successfully undergone ankle surgery, which kind of rattled my brain for a minute. I had no idea Kofi got hurt in that brawl angle they shot on TV a couple weeks ago. I mean, last week I jokingly scribbled out Kofi in that thumbnail when they advertised the 5-way for SmackDown. I just thought Xavier was put in there last minute because they changed their mind. I didn't know he actually got hurt, though. Damn, surgery, too? I gotta go back and watch that segment again. What the hell happened? I mean, I know they ended up having a brawl, but did someone fall on Kofi? Did he try doing a stupid dive? What happened? Man. He's going to miss WrestleMania for that, too. It's unfortunate. Oh, in any case, in about the time it took for me to start wondering what LA Knight potentially could have in store for WrestleMania this year, Xavier Woods cradled LA Knight in a small package and pinned him in 2 minutes. And they immediately cut to Wade Barrett and Michael Cole at the commentary desk and moved on with recognizing the Great Muta as the next inductee into the 2023 Hall of Fame. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there trying to convince myself they aren't just outright burying this guy on purpose. But hey, in completely unrelated news, the Great Muta is going into the WWE Hall of Fame. Cool. I don't know why. The Great Muta never wrestled in WWE at any point. I think he had a retirement match not all that long ago, so I don't know, maybe they feel obligated to do this as some kind of publicity stunt. I mean, it'll be cool to see Muta again. I just don't really get the context of the induction. I always liked Muta growing up as a kid. Hopefully I can manage to stick around for a few more years on YouTube so we can cover some of his matches in 89 or 90 in WCW. You know, with the limited exposure I got to watching Muta growing up, since I wasn't really following a lot of the New Japan stuff at a young age, they made the most out of his run during that short window he actually stuck around in WCW. You know, especially by that period, God, the Jim Herd era, when WCW was in total shambles from a booking standpoint. All those stupid, bad gimmick ideas they were trying, horrible knockoff WWF presentation. Somehow Muta was able to surpass all that and be one of the standouts. But yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing him back. I wonder who's going to induct him. So with that, we had Sheamus and Drew McIntyre in a match to determine who would be facing Gunther for the IC title. As if anybody couldn't have already predicted the finish when they announced this thing, you know, a week ago. I mean, to be honest with you, the match was okay for what it was, but the finish was so damn predictable, it kind of didn't matter at the end of the day. Started off kind of slow. They picked things up a little bit toward the end. Imperium was out ringside watching the whole time, so you had to figure they were going to somehow get involved by the end. And here's what they came up with for their lame fucked finish. Drew and Sheamus hit simultaneous kicks on each other. They're both laid out. So the ref begins initiating the 10 count. And Gunther, upon realizing that neither guy was going to get back to their feet before the ref counted to 10, he not only gets on the ring apron to yell at the official, but he then gets into the ring. He just waltzes in the ring, willy-nilly, while there's a match in progress. So what does the referee do? Not a goddamn thing. Just stands there with thumb up his sphincter. And when Gunther gets in their faces and asks, who wants it more? That's when Marcel the Shell and Fabio Ichabod hit the ring for the double DQ. Although if we're really trying to nitpick things here, technically Sheamus was the one that got decked first. So all things being equal, he should probably be the one getting the title shot since he was struck first. So Gunther proceeds to lay them both out. He powerbombs Sheamus onto Drew's back. I wrote down, why? And then right as Imperium is about to leave, that's when Adam Pearce shows up on the big screen to book the three-way for the pay-per-view that nobody saw coming. Yay. They did it. They actually did it. They managed to book a match involving Gunther, and now I don't want to see it. All because of the multi-man stipulation. That's all it took. So get ready for that. On the same show, trying to announce more matches for the WrestleMania card, not only are we going to get two, count them, two fucking Fatal 4-Ways, now we can add another triple threat on top of it. Because when in doubt, multi-man matches. You just can't ever get enough of those, can you? Again, I prefer just seeing Drew and Gunther in a regular singles match, but I don't know. Should I give him the benefit of the doubt? Sure, why not? I'm a cautiously optimistic person. Maybe it'll be a moderately decent three-way for a change. Haven't seen WWE do a good three-way in years. Maybe this one will be the one we'll talk about for years to come. We'll see. Decent match with a way too predictable finish. And again, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Because now we cycle back to where we all started at the beginning. Sami Zayn came out in Seg 1 to try one last ditch effort to get Kevin Owens back on his side. It didn't go according to plan. But we also knew that we had a scheduled confrontation on the same night with Jey Uso and Sami. And this was Jay's opportunity to speak his mind on everything that's gone down with him turning on Sami. And they didn't waste any time here. Sami came right down from the beginning, didn't let Jay get a word in edgewise, told him whatever he needed to vent, get off his chest, do it now. And, the whole thing kind of boils down to this. From day one, Jey Uso never trusted Sami. He always thought he was a slime ball. And over time, Sami earned Jay's trust. He became one of Jay's brothers. And that meant the world to Jay because he was brought up from childhood to put family first. So when Sami picked his spot at the Royal Rumble and hit Roman with the chair, Jay's hands were tied. He did not have a choice. But that's where Sami cuts him off and says he's been preaching the same story for weeks now, that he didn't have a choice. But that's a lie. Jay's had a choice every single step of the way with this. He's chosen on his own accord to continue to take abuse from Roman week after week, month after month, now closing in on year after year. And Sami's convinced that Jay's not angry at him. He's angry at himself because he hasn't had the balls to pull the trigger. Now, by that point, Jay had enough of it, so he starts pounding away on Sami, throwing haymakers. Sami's trying to fight back. And while they're in the middle of their brawl, here comes Jimmy to come to the aid of his brother. By now, the dog pack beatdown is working against Sami. It looks like Sami's going to get fucked in this whole equation. When whose music should hit? Thunderous ovation, by the way. Yes, he's back. It's Kevin Owens to the rescue. He shows up in the crowd. He lays out the Usos, hits them both with stunners, kicks them out of the ring. And all night, going back to the very opening of the show, when Owens and Sami were standing across the ring from each other, what were the fans chanting? But hug it out. And we waited for it. And we got our payoff. After disposing of the heels, Owens turns to look at Sami. He goes over. He grabs him. And he gives him a hug. And the people all cream themselves with excitement. One of the loudest pops in the entire show. Probably since Sami's entrance in Montreal for the title match with Roman. The people blew a gasket more for the hug spot than Kevin's actual return. They're like, Oh, that's cool. Kevin's back. Now fucking hug his ass. And when he did, the people all went, yeah, he hugged him. Yeah. Because grown-ass adults watch this product, apparently. I mean, it was a pretty cool moment. It's well documented, the friendship these two have with each other. So, as corny as it was, at the same time, it was believable. It felt authentic. And the people bought it. They understood it. Which in due part, I think, is why it worked. Again, yeah, a little hokey for my taste. It's not really my style of wrestling. While I've never been on board with the whole bromance thing, you know, friendship runs pretty deep. And like I said, if you know the history between these guys, it's a scenario that you can view outside the world of kayfabe. Yes, in story, they were scripted to hug each other at the end of the show here. By that same token, is it something you can envision them doing in a real-life situation? Absolutely. I could see these guys hugging in the parking lot after the show's over. So I liked it. You know, obviously, you know what this is setting up. They didn't make it public yet, but it was a great way to close out the show. The whole shot with Cody on the big screen in the back smiling while Owens had his arm around Sammy's neck, that was a cool visual. Although it did make me wonder something. Was Cody watching the whole time while Sammy was getting his ass kicked by the Usos? Some friend. What, did he just happen to know that Owens was on standby waiting to run in to make the save? Or was that just happenstance? And that part was a little dicey. Are we sure Cody's not turning heel soon? Elsewise, that was a fucking dick move. Yeah, let me just stand here and wait for somebody to run out to help Sammy. That'll work. I already did my deed. I don't need to go back out there again. That doesn't work for me, brother. That was probably the only part of the segment that I shook my head at. Other than that, thumbs up. Great payoff. This was the direction that I kind of figured they were going eventually. I just didn't know how they were going to wind up getting there. It's gone through a lot of twists and turns, but now that we've seen it unfold in real time, now that Owens is back on board with Sammy and they've patched everything up, it worked. And all it took was for Sammy to utter the magic words, "You're my friend, and I love you." That's all KO ever wanted to hear. Never cared about conducting business. Never cared about taking down the bloodline with his cohorts. He just wanted reaffirmation that at the end of the day, he and Sammy were still friends. Because again, Kevin Owens, while it may not look like it, there is a lovable soul somewhere down in that deep, deep belly. That deep, deep, round, ovular beer gut. Sorry, I had to. Might be a shocking thing to hear, but yeah, that bloodline stuff, pretty good shit. It's almost like it's the only thing carrying the load on this show right now. And we're, 3 weeks out from WrestleMania now? I mean, at least now we have one other big marquee match to look forward to. Some of the card is coming together on the outskirts, but I mean, there's still a little ways out from ramping up my enthusiasm. The Ray Dom story is good, but it's also starting to get to that shit or get out the pot situation. Like, they really got to turn up the heat a little bit in that feud, because right now, they've really hit a brick wall with Ray still being hesitant to fight Dom. Like, they've been riding that wave of momentum for a while. It's worked, but they need to escalate that feud a little bit because it's stagnating. It's not going anywhere right now, so it needs a little bit more energy. the IC title three-way, while everybody saw it coming, I mean, there's somewhat of a story there. I hate the three-way idea because I hate multi-person matches. I don't think we need to see a triple threat when we're already going to see two fatal four-ways on the same goddamn card. Talk about overkill. And then there's the LA Knight thing, which I can't explain it. Call it a burial. Call it stupidity. I just call it being totally clueless. Whether or not it's intentional on their end to make the guy look like a bumbling jackass, it's not going to stop the people from rallying behind him. And if their end goal is to make the guy heel in the long run, well, his booking formula ain't working. They need to try something else. Anyhow, have we done enough damage on this one? I think so. I'm exhausted. Well, I think that'll round things up until we come back on Friday. So thank you all for watching, everybody. I have something pre-planned to do some kind of WrestleMania preview show at some point. Let me double check the date on this real quick while I have a second. April 1st and 2nd. Okay, so let's see, today, finishing up there. Yeah, so we're basically 2 weeks out. A week and a half, I guess. Yeah, I mean, they got a couple more shows to patch everything together here, but for a 2-night event, they don't really have a lot set in stone right now, if you really think about it. What do we got? We got the Rollins-Logan Paul match, which I guess has been slated for night 1. The Roman-Cody match is slated for night 2. I mean, they got some other things set here, but it's just a matter of figuring out what night they're going to be on. So, yeah, we'll figure it out as we go. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back on Friday. Take care. Peace out.